Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. It's Wednesday for you guys, and we're going to just finish up Unit 4, Sensation and Perception. We're going to focus more today on perception and then the hearing, so the anatomy of the ear and a couple of the other senses. I miss you guys. It's so crazy that it's like almost May, and I haven't seen you guys for over a month. I sincerely hope that you guys are all doing well and preparing for the test. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to do some like group Google chats or Zoom sessions if you guys want to like do some of the FRQs together or talk about your particular FRQ. A couple kids have taken me up on that and it's been fun. And it's just nice to see faces and talk about Netflix shows. Okay, so we're going to quickly get into the rest of the unit, so perception. Tonight's homework, we're going to do an FRQ, and then tomorrow I'm just going to post like, I'm going to do it part of my video. I'll show you kind of like not so good of a response, not of yours, and then I'll show you kind of like what College Board says would score the points. So you could kind of see like how one FRQ is maybe not so great, but then another FRQ, you could see how you could score the points. So I'll show you that, and hopefully that'll kind of help a little bit. I know that you feel like, you're alone and trying to do this on your own, but I promise you guys are in really good shape. I mean, we've done all these units. We're just like reviewing. You're going to be able to have like some notes. You're going to be able to have your notes, but like you don't want too many notes because then it's going to be overwhelming for the time frame. But I'm really going to try to get you guys, I'm going to pull out like most important topics from units in weeks to come. So you guys are good. Don't stress. I think it's going to be good. I think we're going to beat McKeag. Okay. All right. So let's get started with perception. So we've talked a little bit about that in the beginning, but just keeping in mind that perception, that's more of our experiences and our kind of like preconceived notions that help us kind of like navigate the way. And we do this because we have this perceptual set, and it's this way of perceiving the world based on our own context, our own culture, our own values, our own experiences, and also like our motivations and our emotions as well. I want to make sure you know that like what we perceive is not necessarily what we sense. I mean, they definitely overlap, but they're not the same. And like my perception could be different than your perception, and that's okay. But it's not the same as our senses. Each perception with people are not the same. We have two eyes, but we only see one thing. We have blind spots, but then our mind fills them. And then we see everything upside down because remember we put it, when we see it, when it goes to the cornea and the iris and the pupil and it goes back to the retina, it really turns that image upside down, but then we see it right side up. Okay. Don't forget that cultural context and like environmental cues and all of that, those are really important in our perceptual set too. So what we've been exposed to in our culture. So I put this little hashtag here. So for you guys, this is a hashtag. But for me, when I was growing up, this was like a number sign and a pound sign on the rotary phone that I used to use. Those kinds of things are different cultures and different. That makes our perceptual set different. Okay, and then just keep in mind that sensation is that bottom up processing and perception is that top down processing. So again, that higher order thinking. And again, it's really related to like judgments and preconceived notions. Okay, and then priming, that's getting someone ready to kind of like think in a certain way. So remember when we did that, what was it that it was for in the memory unit, and I was telling you guys, I was reading you like sets of words and you had to write down, you like listened to it and then you had to write down as many. A lot of them had to do with like bedtime and nighttime and sleeping. So even though you didn't hear those words, you wrote down stuff that related to sleeping, dreaming, all of that, because you were primed, because I kept saying things that related to that. So the same thing happens with our perception. We could be primed to think a certain way because, somebody has said something before in the past, or, somebody talked about numbers and then you saw something and you related it to numbers. So it's all our perception, and it starts with priming too. Perceptual constancy. This is where objects like are unchanging even as illumination and retinal images change. So this pertains to like size constancy, color constancy, shape, and brightness. So, the size constancy, that's this little image here. These guys are actually the same size, but because they're seen farther away, that's like the size constancy. And that's like if you see something far away, you can like pinch it, and that's size constancy, even though they're the same size. It's just the distance away. This one over here is like shape. Obviously, we see it as a rectangle. When the door opens, it's not really a rectangle anymore, but our mind keeps it in that rectangle shape constancy. Okay, and the same happens with like color, just depending on like the shading. Remember the blue and yellow dress that was on Instagram or Facebook or something? It was like, was the dress blue or was the dress gold? Or that's all related to like color constancy and brightness. Okay, and that's perceptual constancy. Okay, just a couple other terms I wanted to make sure that you remembered. Inattentional blindness. Remember when we watched that video about the guys playing basketball, and we were supposed to, the whole video, we were supposed to just count how many times the basketball kind of went up and down, but we missed that gorilla dancing through because we were so focused on, counting how many times the basketball went up and down. So even though it was right in front of us, when we watched it again, we were like, oh my God, it was like right there. How'd we miss it? We missed it because remember, we can only keep, our brains can only pay attention to kind of like one thing. So we were focused on counting how many times the basketball went up and down, right? So that's inattentional blindness. And that's another part of our perception. Also, the mere exposure effect. This is like the more you see something, the more you'll probably remember it and like it. And this goes along with those subliminal messages. And these are very popular, obviously for advertising. Whenever you're at the movies and you see those previews and you see like the jumping up and down popcorn guy and the soda, I always feel like I'm sitting there and I'm like, I should have got popcorn, and then I like go up and get it. So those are all like, advertising places that are like, putting those little subliminal messages kind of into, different things to get us to do things, right? Okay, and that's the mere exposure effect as well. So the more you see it, the more you'll probably remember it, and the more you'll probably like it. So just keep that in mind with perception. Okay, I think that's it with some of these. Yeah, I think that's everything with perception. So again, perception, it's that processes information into new data, which leads to then thoughts. We talked about perceptual constancy. Yeah. I mean, you could kind of go back over some of those illusions if you wanted to, but I'm just really trying to pick up big key items on this unit. Okay, so I wanted to we talked about the eye anatomy for a while in the last video. So the hearing and the ear anatomy, that's really important too. And again, just like the eye anatomy and the vision, you have to know the parts and then like how hearing works then. So again, I feel like I keep saying transduction, but that's super important. You have to know how like that happens, like how you see the light and it affects like your eye, and then how you see something. The same with the ear. You have this energy that comes in, it goes to neural energy, and then it goes to perception and then to our brain. Okay, so in hearing, the vibration happens in these waves, remember? So length, that is that's a size of a wave, so it's measured in hertz. And we did that mosquito test, didn't we, on our phones? Or maybe it was on like a Brain Games episode, but it was that like buzzing, that like beep, and you could hear, if you were 60 and over, you should be able to hear this, and then it would go down and down. That's all measured in hertz, which is the length of the vibration. So remember, I couldn't hear as well once we got to like, I don't know, I think it was 40 and under. I couldn't hear anymore. So that is kind of how they determine pitch. It's also with that. And then the height of a wave, that's measured in amplitude, and that's the intensity or the loudness. And then it's also in the shape of the wave. So if it's like, really short, like, long, the shape of the wave too. That's all of that happens, and that's how we hear the different pitches, loudness, tones, all that. Okay, so the anatomy of the ear, this is really important. Okay, so it starts with the pinna, which is like just this outer edge. It's where we get pierced. It's called the pinna. I thought I had a little, it's like the pierce of the ear. Like, I don't know. I was going to come up with like a crazy mnemonic for it, but I decided not to. But anyway, pinna, pierce the ear. It's just the outer edge of the ear. And then the ear or the auditory canal, that's where you can like, clean it out with a Q-tip. The auditory canal, it's like just literally like a cave. Okay. And then it goes into the eardrum. And the eardrum vibrates to send the messages to the three ossicles, those three little bones, right? So the eardrum, it vibrates to send the message, and it goes to the ossicles. And the ossicles happen like in order. So hammer, anvil, stirrup. So it like, clicks, like it literally looks like a hammer. So it like hammers, and then it touches the anvil, and then the stirrup. And the stirrup looks just like a horse stirrup. I guess that's why they call it stirrup. But you can kind of see here where it kind of looks just like a little stirrup. And then that stirrup hits the cochlea, which is that like shape that looks like a snail kind of. And basically the cochlea, which houses that basilar membrane, super, super important. So it's like the fluid filled, and it's inside the cochlea. The basilar membrane's inside the cochlea, right? And that's where the magic happens, in that cochlea, because that's where the hair cells vibrate, which is where conduction happens. So it goes from, the pinna, the auditory canal, the eardrum, the ossicles, hammer, anvil, stirrup, to the cochlea. And then once that happens, it sends those nerve bundles to the auditory nerve, and then that sends the message to the brain. And that's when the brain tells us what we're hearing. Okay? Hope that makes sense. But the basilar membrane is super important, and that's in that cochlea. Okay? And that's where that magic happens for hearing. Okay? Perfect. All right, so hearing loss. So as we age, we lose hair cells. So the more we go to concerts, those hair cells, they get they get worn down as we do things. So as we age, naturally we lose hair cells, and so we lose our hearing as we get older. But there's also conduction deafness and sensory neural deafness. So conduction deafness, that's damage to the mechanical parts. So the eardrum and that middle ear. And that's where a hearing aid, you can just, slip in a hearing aid, and you can be good to go with that. It doesn't cure it like totally, but the hearing aid will help. The sensory neural deafness, that's where it's more serious, and that's damage to the cochlea and like further back in that auditory canal. And that cannot be cured at all. You can get a cochlea implant, but remember when we talked about this, it's kind of controversial, and it's super expensive. Okay, other senses. So our body awareness, that's another sense, and that's the vestibular sense. So kind of like the awareness of where your head is in relation to the ground, right? It's controlled in the semicircular canals of the ear. So it's kind of like that when you get motion sickness if you're on a boat. Sometimes I get car sick if I'm like reading, because like my head is kind of moving around and my eyes are looking. So all of that is your vestibular sense. So it's the awareness of like your body in space. So motion sickness obviously happens, and that happens because it's the signals from your vestibular system and your eyes, they like clash with one another. And then we also have this kinesthetic sense, and that's kind of the awareness of your body in regards to itself and how fast you're moving in which direction. So that's important as well. What else did I want to tell you with this? So you don't have to look, like this is one where I don't have to like look at my finger to touch my nose. I don't have to look at my hands to clap them. I know where they are in relation to my body. Okay. Just a quick little trivia here. Athletic ability is not actually in the muscles. I mean, it is in the muscles, but it's more in the brain. And it's that like long-term potentiation where it's like the more you practice something, the better you're going to be. The more you practice, athletics or soccer or whatever it is, your body and your muscles, they train, but it actually starts in the brain first. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Last here is the sense of touch. Oh, I have one more slide after this, I think. So touch, remember that's all in the parietal lobe up here. And that's that blend of sensations. So touch, pain, hot, cold, and it all happens in the parietal lobe. And then remember, it starts too in that somatosensory cortex. So remember we have the frontal lobe, then the motor cortex is that small strip, and then the somatosensory cortex is right after the motor cortex. And that's where it houses like, what parts of our body feel more pain. Like our tips of our fingers are really sensitive. The hands are really sensitive. So that's all in that somatosensory cortex. Okay, and it's very subjective from person to person. Like some people might have a high tolerance for pain and some not so much. So it's tactile touch. It's very subjective. So tickle, you might be more ticklish than I am, or mood might affect your tickleness. So hot, cold, all that stuff. That's all in that somatosensory and the parietal lobe up here. So scratching an itch, rubbing a stubbed toe, icing an injury, the nervous system kind of has to pay attention to which signal they send to the brain with that. And then this takes us into that gait theory, that gait pain theory that we had. So, if you ever like rub out an injury when you get hurt, or, my kids would fall when they were little and I would like pick them up and I'd hurry up and rub it out. That's that like gait pain theory, that pain signal, the afferent from the PNS to the CNS can be blocked because you're, kind of doing that. What's that thing? Acupuncture is also one of these, gait pain theory. That's what you can do because it puts pressure on that. Okay. All right. Okay. The last little bit here, the taste and smell. These are the only chemical senses that we have, and it's because they're from our environment, basically, and they enter through the nose and the mouth, and they're these molecules that kind of, enter in, and it's what makes us sick. So that's why right now they're saying like wash your hands and don't touch your face because of those chemical senses in the molecules. Keep in mind for gustation, that's the sense of taste. There's 5 tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, which is that savory sense. You have taste receptors all over your tongue. I think in your book, it actually shows you a diagram, and there's super tasters out there. And taste is also very subjective too, and it's open to influence from our culture and expectations and also our emotions. Okay, and then olfaction, that's the sense of smell. It's the only sense that bypasses the thalamus. So remember that sense, sometimes that comes up, sometimes they're like, which sense is not part of the thalamus? It's olfaction, which is your nose. And it's more so found in the limbic system where our memories are located. Okay, so I think that's everything. Yes, good. With Unit 4, amazing. We're done with Unit 4. Tomorrow, I'm going to go over the FRQ that you guys are doing today. And then we're going to start the learning unit. And then next week, we're going to finish out learning and move into the cognition unit, which is a big one. So I want to spend a couple days in cognition. And then the only things we have left are the motivation, development, and then we can go back through personality a little bit. And we already did Unit 11. I might, put a little bit of review on Unit 11, and then we're going to be done. So you guys are awesome. I miss you. Email anytime, even if you just want to say hello. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, take care.